So the next thing I'm going to do is kind of go over that worksheet 3.4. I'm going to go over one of the problems with you, just to show you how to do the descriptions. Hopefully you printed this out, this how to CUSS properly, the CUSS, when you're describing a distribution. And it's just like a general script of how you describe the graph and how you're going to do it on a test, because we're going to ask you to describe it using CUSS. You'll start by saying the center of the distribution and, whatever it's talking about and the value. And it's either going to be the mean, median, or mode. It's going to be the mean if it's symmetrical. And it's going to be the median if it's skewed or bimodal. And you'll hardly ever use the mode. The only way you'd use the mode is if nearly all of them were in one spot. It's not going to happen on the test. It's either going to be mean or median. Mean if it's symmetrical, median if it's skewed or bimodal. Then they want you to talk about U, which is unusual features, like gaps or outliers. And so they want you to talk about any outliers and any gaps that there are. And you'll be specific to that problem, like outliers, gaps. And then they want you to talk about, after you've done the center and the unusual, you do the shape. And the shape is either going to be symmetric, skewed right or left, or bimodal. So let me show you shapes right here. It's really good to have these in your notes, like a little tiny picture of each of the 5 different types. They're pretty easy to remember though. Skewed left does that little slope down to the left. Skewed right will do a slope down to the right. Uniform will be straight across. Bimodal will have 2 peaks in it. And symmetrical will look like a mirror image kinda. It doesn't have to be exact, but if it looks kinda like a mirror image, it's going to be symmetrical. And when I do these, this is the first thing I'll look at is the shape. That's the first thing, because I know that if it's symmetrical, I'm going to use the mean. And if it's skewed or bimodal, I'm going to use the median. Because it's also going to decide what you say about spread. For standard deviation is going to be used if it's symmetrical. If it's symmetrical, you're going to use standard deviation. Standard deviation and mean always go together. You'll talk about those if they're symmetrical. But if they're skewed, you're going to talk about IQR or median. IQR and median go together. If you're going to talk about one, you usually talk about the other. So if it's skewed or weird looking on these, if it's any of those, you're going to talk about median and IQR. And if it's this symmetrical, not the uniform, my bad. If it's uniform or symmetrical, those two, you're going to talk about mean and standard deviation. So you're going to talk about either median and IQR or mean and standard deviation. Uniform, think about it, uniform is symmetrical. If it's just straight flat like that, you could fold it in half and it would look the same on both sides. But if it's skewed right or bimodal, it's going to be either of these two are going to be median or IQR. And mean and standard deviation are going to be symmetrical, uniform or symmetrical. As long as you know that, you should get this right. So kind of have that script and have it, you don't have to say it exactly like this. It's just a good script to use to make sure you cover everything when you talk about it. Now I'm going to use these to start talking about one of the problems on the test, on the 3.4 homework now. So you got C, the center. Mean is a better measurement if you're symmetrical, and median is better if you're skewed or bimodal. Then you got U, unusual features, any outliers or gaps. Then you got the shape. The shape is key because it tells you whether to use mean and median and IQR or mean and standard deviation. And then you got the spread, which is either IQR or standard deviation. You're not going to use range on the test. It's hardly ever used. It's more important to know standard deviation and IQR. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you exactly how to do one of these problems. I'm going to pick one from the 4 here. And I'm going to pick number 2. So look at number 2 on 3.4 that talks about the Coca-Cola Company sponsors a basketball tournament to raise money for Habitat for Humanity. And the colleges and universities are invited to attend the tournament, and it shows how many appearances each college has made. And you can see from these appearances that one group seems to get invited, one college seems to get invited all the time. And which college seems to like always get invited seems like an outlier here. Anybody see it? You can chat it or say it. Yeah, Notre Dame. Oh. Yeah, Notre Dame looks like an outlier, right? It's bigger than all the... It looks like they're going to like every tournament, Notre Dame. So I'm spotting an outlier, but what I have to do on all these problems is graph this. And I'm going to use Staplet. And if you haven't done Staplet yet, now is a good time to practice. I'll give you a little time. And where you're going to go is one quantitative single group, which is what this whole chapter has been. One quantitative single group. I'm going to call it tournament appearances. And then I'm going to type in the data. So if you want to go along with this, I'm going to post a link here to staplet.com and get some practice here. Like, go to Staplet and use this data, tournament appearances, and just type in all these points right here. That's what you'll be doing on the test too. You'll just type them in. And I will give you a few minutes to type these in. And it should look like this when you're done. It'll give you a dot plot. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that, to practice in Staplet, getting information like this in there and looking at it and analyzing it. All right, I'll give you a few minutes from now. That shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes. All right, and as you're getting them typed in, just go ahead and start typing you're gonna have to write down all the stats. The range would be the biggest minus the smallest. 34 minus 2 equals 32. Q1 is 2.5. Q3 is 15. And I got IQR. All right, we'll do the fences a little bit later. The fences are not going to be a big problem on the test for this right here. You're just going to need to like list some of those. I might ask you for one or two of them. All right. So once I've got it all typed in like this, and you start with a dot plot, you want to go to histogram. You always want to look at the histogram for when you're describing the data. So look at the histogram. And the first thing I spot when I put up this histogram is what kind of shape does this have? Is it symmetrical? Is it skew in one direction? Can anybody tell me the shape of this? So what is the shape on this one? Oh yeah, okay, I'm back. So yeah, hopefully everybody got this typed in and got this data right here. So the first thing I'm going to start with is look at the shape of the graph. You always want to start by looking at the histogram. So when you're describing it, the first thing I look at is shape because it decides two of the other ones. So can you tell me what kind of shape this is here? Anybody? Can y'all hear me now? Or is it still not working?
Isn't that skewed right?
Yeah, it's skewed right? Okay, y'all can hear me now? That was weird. My thing wasn't off when y'all... Okay. All right, so it's skewed right, right? So when I start describing it, let me pull over my script that I put. Since I know that it's skewed right, which center am I going to use? The center of the distribution of tournament appearances is approximately 6. I'm going to use the median, because remember, if it's skewed, you use the median. So you talk about the center being 6, which is the median. So you decide, am I going to use the median or the mean? Median, because it's skewed. If it were symmetrical, I would have used mean. But this one's skewed, so I'm going to use median. And then they want you to talk about the outliers, the unusual stuff, outliers or gaps. And here's where you want to talk about Notre Dame. Notre Dame's the outlier with 34 appearances. They're way bigger than everybody else. And there's a big gap between them and everybody else. There's a gap between like 19 and 34, right? It's between 19 and 34, there's nobody else. Staplet's not working right now? Uh-oh. That's not good. It's working okay for me right now. I don't know. All right, you can just watch along with my graph then if Staplet's not working at the moment. Okay, so I talked about the gap. There's a gap between Notre Dame right there and... Okay, same for you. Oh, crap. And then the next thing I'm going to talk about is the shape, and it appears to be skewed right because most people don't go that many times. Like most of the data is from 0 to 10. So they only invite a lot of these teams only a few times. So that's why it's skewed to the right. Like there's a big grouping on the left, and then it skews down towards Notre Dame. And then the spread, since it is skewed, you're going to talk about IQR. If it were symmetrical, you would talk about the standard deviation. But we're going to talk about IQR because it's skewed. So the spread is about 12.5 appearances based on the IQR. So that's what you need to describe a graph. Basically those 4 things: the center, and then the unusual things like outliers and gaps, and then the shape, and then the spread. And you talk about all 4, and on the test, this is a big question. It's worth more points than any other question, and you got to have all 4 of them because I count off for each of the 4 that you don't have, that you didn't talk about. So these problems right here, these 4 are really good for getting to know like everything you need to know for this chapter. If you can do these problems, you're in pretty good shape. So one more thing. Let me show you the outliers, how you find them. Because we said the outlier was Notre Dame, right? Let me show you how. I forgot to do that. To find outliers, you look at box plots. So on my data right here, I'm going to go down and pick box plot. And there's my outlier. See the dot out there, 34? An outlier will always show up as dots on a box plot. And there's only one on this one. So as you put in all this data, there's 2 things you absolutely want to look at. You want to look at the histogram to tell the shape. And you want to look at the box plot to see any outliers. And you want to know how to read a box plot too. And we talked about that last class. All right, any questions on that? How to describe the graph? Everything else we had